A masked man walks into a diner with a gun pointed at her head. Everyone drops to the floor. Everyone screams. Everyone except her. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't raise her hands. She just looks at him with eyes that have seen worse than this and says 5 words that make him load a weapon. But it's not the robber who matters in this story. It's the man in the corner booth. The man in the dark suit who freezes mid-sip when he hears her voice. The man whose hand trembles as he sets down his coffee cup because he knows that voice. He's carried it in his chest like a scar for 7 years. She saved his life once in another diner on another rainy night. She doesn't remember him, but he has never forgotten her. This is the story of how a single act of kindness between strangers became a debt that could never be repaid and a love that should never have existed. Rain hammered against the windows like the sky was trying to break in. The diner was nearly empty that morning. A truck driver slouched in booth 3, nursing cold coffee. An elderly man with a newspaper he wasn't really reading. 2 college students sharing a basket of fries they couldn't afford to finish. And behind the counter, Elena Park wiped down the coffee machine with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The door swung open. A man in a black mask stepped inside, holding a gun. Time fractured. The truck driver hit the linoleum floor so hard his knees would bruise. The college kids scrambled under their table, one of them whimpering into her sleeve. The old man froze, his cup suspended halfway to his lips, coffee dripping onto the table in slow, heavy drops. Elena didn't move. She stood behind the counter, hands flat on the surface, and looked at the gunman the way you look at rain when you've already been soaked to the bone. No scream, no flinch, no widening of the eyes. Just a slow, measured exhale. And then she spoke. You picked the wrong diner. And the wrong morning. Her voice was so calm it made the gunman hesitate. His hand was shaking. Elena saw that first. Not the gun, the hand. The way his fingers couldn't quite commit to the grip. The way the barrel drifted left, then right, then back to center, like he couldn't decide where to aim. He was young. She could tell by the way he stood, by the brand-new sneakers that didn't match the desperation in his posture. He'd probably been standing outside for 20 minutes, working up the courage to walk through that door. In the corner booth, a man in a tailored black suit set his coffee down without making a sound. His name was Dante Choi. His hand didn't shake. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes shifted, like a locked door being forced open from the inside, because Dante knew that voice. He knew it the way you know a song you haven't heard in years but can still sing every word to. He knew it in his bones, in his blood, in the hollow place beneath his ribs where grief lived. He hadn't moved when the gun appeared, not because of fear, but because the moment that woman spoke, the entire world collapsed into a single point. That voice. 7 years. He had found her. The robber's voice cracked. Open the register. Elena looked at the gun. Not at him. At the weapon itself. She looked at it the way you'd look at a leaking faucet. An inconvenience. Something that needed handling. The register has maybe $200 in it. She said evenly, you walked in here with a weapon for $200 on a Tuesday morning. She paused. You don't want to do this. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't sympathy. It was a statement, delivered with the flat certainty of a woman who had seen enough bad decisions to recognize one unfolding in real time. She said it the way someone says the sky is gray, without emotion, without investment. Just fact. The robber stepped closer. The gun was 2 feet from her forehead now. His breathing came loud and ragged through the mask. I said, open it. Elena tilted her head slightly. Put the gun down, she said quietly. Walk out that door. This doesn't have to end badly for you. Across the room, Dante's 2 men had reached inside their jackets the second the gun appeared. Dante raised one hand, without looking at them. A single gesture. Stop. His men froze. Dante's eyes were locked on the woman behind the counter. Not on the robber. Not on the gun. On her. On the way her shoulders didn't climb toward her ears. On the way her breathing stayed, even while everyone else had stopped breathing entirely. And then she said something else. Something low, directed at the robber. Something Dante couldn't quite hear from where he sat, and his entire body went still. That voice. The room compressed. The rain became static. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency only he seemed to hear. Everything in the diner reduced itself to a single point. The sound of a woman's voice he hadn't heard in 7 years. A voice that had no business being in this diner. A voice he had carried inside his chest like a scar he never let anyone see. The robber backed toward the door. Whatever Elena said to him in that last quiet sentence, the one Dante couldn't hear, it landed. The kid's arm dropped. He turned. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the rain. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone in booth 3 was sobbing. The old man was still on the floor, trembling. Elena pulled a rag from her apron and wiped down the counter where the coffee had spilled. She refilled the abandoned mug at table 2. She picked up her order pad and clicked her pen and turned to the next customer like the robbery was just weather. Something that passed through, something that didn't stay. Dante stood. His men stood with him. He left cash on the table, enough to cover 10 meals, and walked out without a word. He didn't speak to her. He didn't approach the counter. He didn't ask her name. But he sat in the back of his car in the rain for a long time afterward, hands folded in his lap, eyes closed. Still, silent. His driver knew better than to ask. 7 years. That voice. He had found her. 7 years ago, Dante Choi sat in a diner at 3 a.m. and thought about dying. He was 22 years old. His father had been dead for 6 days. The funeral was held in a language he barely spoke, in a country he barely knew, paid for with money he didn't have. The men who attended, his father's associates, the ones in dark suits who never looked anyone in the eye for too long, had come and gone without offering a word of comfort. They came to confirm the death, to measure the vacuum, to decide which pieces of the empire were worth salvaging and which could be left to rot. Dante was the piece they left. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had $40 to his name. His apartment, a freezing room above a dry cleaner, was 3 blocks away, but he couldn't go back, couldn't sit in that silence, couldn't stare at the wall his father had leaned against 3 weeks before the heart attack, when he looked at Dante with something that might have been pride or might have been pity, and said nothing at all. So Dante sat in a diner instead. Corner booth, coffee he hadn't touched, rain on the windows. The waitress had stopped checking on him an hour ago. The cook was scraping the grill in the back. The place was empty except for Dante and the specific kind of quiet that only exists at 3 a.m, when the world had forgotten you're alive. He was thinking about the bridge, 6 blocks east. He had stood at the railing for 11 minutes on the way here. 11 minutes of staring at black water and thinking about how easy it would be to stop carrying away a name that had given him nothing but debt, enemies, and a dead father in a foreign land. He didn't jump, but he didn't walk away because he wanted to live. He walked away because his legs moved before his mind decided. Muscle memory, survival instinct, the body choosing for the brain. He ended up in the diner because it was the first place with lights on. The door opened. He didn't look up. Someone slid into the booth across from him. He still didn't look up. He assumed it was the waitress. He assumed she was going to tell him to order something or leave. Whatever you're thinking about doing, a voice said quietly, it can wait until morning. Dante looked up. She was young, maybe 20, beautiful in a way that wasn't trying to be. No makeup, hair pulled back, a college sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, and a backpack slung over one shoulder like she come straight from the library or a late shift or both. Her eyes were tired, but steady. She was looking at him the way no one had looked at him in weeks. Directly, without agenda, without calculation. I don't know what you mean, Dante said. Yes, you do, she said. Not unkind, just certain. He stared at her. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She sat there in that booth like she had every right to be there, like sitting across from a stranger at 3 a.m. was the most natural thing in the world. She stayed for an hour. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what happened. She talked about small things, a paper she was writing, a professor she couldn't stand, a song she'd heard on the walk over that she couldn't get out of her head. She bought him a refill with crumpled bills she pulled from her backpack, like the money mattered, and she was spending it anyway. She talked to him like he was a person sitting in a diner, not a man sitting on the edge of something terrible. When she left, she zipped her backpack and said, "Get home safe." Like it was simple. Like staying alive was just something you did. She walked out into the rain and didn't look back. Dante sat in that booth for another hour. He didn't go to the bridge. He went home. He slept. He woke up the next morning and started building the life that would make him untouchable. Every decision, every alliance, every ruthless calculation that followed, all of it began the morning after a stranger sat across from him and told him to wait until morning. He never got her name. He never saw her face again. But he heard her voice every single day for 7 years. Now, in the back of a black car parked outside a diner in the rain, Dante picked up his phone. He called the one man in his organization who could find anyone. The waitress, he said, the one from this morning. "I need everything." A pause on the other end. "Everything, sir?" Her name, her address, her history, everything. He hung up. He leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes. The rain drummed against the roof. Behind his eyelids, he could still see her. 20 years old, crumpled bills, tired eyes, steady voice. She hadn't recognized him. He was certain of that. To her, that night in the diner was probably a small kindness she forgot by the following week. To him, it was the reason he was still alive. The video hit the internet at 6:47 that evening. Elena didn't know about it until Marcus showed her. He was sitting on the couch with his laptop when she came through the door, still smelling like coffee and grease, her feet aching in the cheap sneakers she'd been meaning to replace for 3 months. Marcus turned the screen toward her without saying anything. His face had that expression he got when he didn't know whether to be proud or worried, the one that made him look exactly like their father. The footage was shaky, shot from under a table by a customer whose hands were trembling so badly the frame bounced every few seconds. But Elena was clear, perfectly clear, standing behind the counter with her hands flat on the surface, looking at a masked man with a gun like he was a mild inconvenience. The audio was muffled, but her voice cut through. Calm, steady, unbothered. The caption read, "Waitress doesn't even flinch during armed robbery." It had 400,000 views. By morning, it would have 2 million. Elena watched it once. She handed the laptop back. "What's for dinner?" she said. Marcus stared at her. "Elle, you had a gun in your face." "And now I don't. What do you want to eat?" He opened his mouth to push. She gave him the look, the one that had been closing conversations since he was 10 years old, and she was 20, and suddenly responsible for both of their lives. He closed his mouth. "Pizza," he said quietly. She ordered pizza. She took a shower. She sat on the edge of her bed for 4 minutes with wet hair, and her hands pressed together between her knees and her eyes closed. Then she got up and ate 2 slices with Marcus while he did homework at the kitchen table, and neither of them mentioned the video again. The call from her boss came at 9 the next morning. Elena was already in uniform, keys in hand, heading for the door. She picked up on the second ring. "Elena, it's Don." She knew from his voice. She knew before he said another word. From the tone, from the hesitation, from the specific silence that comes before someone delivers bad news they've already decided isn't their problem. "People are calling the diner," he said. "Reporters. Some blog thing. I've had 3 calls this morning asking about you by name." A pause. "I can't have that kind of attention here. You understand?" She understood. The diner operated on the margins. Half the staff paid under the table. Health inspections handled with a handshake and an envelope. A kitchen that wouldn't survive a camera crew walking through the door. Elena wasn't being fired for the robbery. She was being fired because the robbery made people look. And the diner couldn't afford to be looked at. "I get it," she said. "I'm sorry, Elena. You're a good worker. I just can't." "I said I get it, Don." She hung up. She stood in the hallway of her apartment with her keys in one hand and her phone in the other, and let the silence hold her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put the keys on the hook. She took off the uniform. She hung in the closet, even though she'd never wear it again, because that's who she was. Someone who put things away properly even when the floor was falling out beneath her. Marcus was at school. The apartment was quiet. Elena sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and started searching for jobs. Waitressing, hostessing, barista, cashier, anything that paid weekly and didn't ask too many questions. She updated a resume that was mostly gaps and half-truths. The college she never finished. The years she couldn't explain. The references she didn't have because every time she rebuilt her life, the old one burned behind her. She applied to 9 places before noon. She ate lunch standing at the counter. Leftover pizza, cold, 2 bites between applications. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. There was no one to call. By the time Marcus came home at 4, the uniform was hidden and dinner was started, and Elena was sitting at the table like it was any other Tuesday. "How was school?" she asked. "Fine." "How was work?" "Fine." He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her his whole life, like he knew she was lying, but loved her too much to say it. She looked back at him the way she always did, like everything was handled. It wasn't, but it would be. It always was. Elena parked in brake. She adjusted. She pivoted. She found the next handhold and gripped it until her knuckles went white. And then she found the one after that. That's what she did. That's what she'd always done. The knock came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 days after the firing. Elena was at the kitchen table, circling job listings in a newspaper she'd picked up from the laundromat because her laptop had died that morning and she couldn't afford to fix it. She was still in the clothes she'd slept in. Her hair was pulled back. She hadn't eaten since the night before because Marcus needed breakfast, and there were 2 eggs left, and she wasn't going to be the one who ate them. She opened the door, and she knew immediately. The suit was the first thing she saw. Dark, tailored, the kind of suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent. Then the shoes, clean, polished, wrong for this hallway. Then the car parked on the street below, visible through the stairwell window. Black, long, idling with a driver sitting behind tinted glass, like this was a movie and not a 4th-floor walk-up in a building where the elevator hadn't worked since March. The man wearing the suit was Korean, late 20s, tall, still in a way that had nothing to do with patience and everything to do with control. His face was composed. His hands were at his sides. He looked at her the way people look at something they've been searching for, not with surprise, with confirmation. "Elena Park," he said. Not a question. "Not interested," she said. He blinked. Just once. "I haven't said anything yet." "You don't need to. I can see the suit. I can see the car. Whatever you're selling, whatever you're offering, whatever you think you know about me from video on the internet, I don't want it." She started to close the door. He didn't put his hand out to stop it. He didn't step forward. He just spoke. "I own a restaurant in Midtown. Legitimate. Clean. I need someone with experience. The pay is 3 times what the diner offered. The hours are better." Elena paused with the door 6 inches from closed. She could see him through the gap. 1 eye. Half a jaw. The knot of a tie that probably cost more than her refrigerator. "Why me?" she asked. "Because I saw how you handle that diner. And I need someone who doesn't panic." "In a restaurant?" "In my restaurant. Yes." She almost laughed. Almost. The kind of laugh that lives in the back of your throat when something is so absurd it circles all the way around to insulting. A man in a $10,000 suit showing up at her apartment, offering her a waitressing job because he saw a video of her not crying during a robbery. "I don't know you," she said. "I don't know what you actually want. And I don't take favors from men I don't know, because every favor I've ever accepted came with a price I didn't agree to." She said it without heat, without anger, just the flat, clear tone of a woman who had learned the hard way that kindness from powerful men was rarely kind. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Plain, white, a name and a number. He held it out through the gap in the door. "If you change your mind," he said. She didn't take it. He set it on the floor in front of her door. He nodded once. He turned and walked down the hallway and didn't look back. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs. Steady, unhurried, the walk of a man who had never been rushed by anything in his life. She closed the door. She locked it. She went back to the kitchen table and sat down and picked up her pen and looked at the circled listings and didn't think about the card on the floor. For 2 days. The rent notice came on Saturday, slid under her door in a yellow envelope. She didn't need to open and know what it said. Marcus's shoes had a hole in the left sole that he'd been stuffing with newspaper and thought she hadn't noticed. The fridge had mustard, half a loaf of bread, and a bottle of water. She had $34 in her account and 9 applications out, and not a single call back. She sat at the table on Saturday night after Marcus went to sleep. The apartment was dark. The yellow envelope was on the counter. The business card was still on the floor by the front door, because she hadn't picked it up and she hadn't thrown it away, and she didn't want to think about what that meant. She thought about it anyway. At 11 o'clock, she walked to the door. She picked up the card. She looked at the name. She looked at the number. She stood there for a long time with the card in one hand and her phone in the other. Then she dialed. It rang once. He answered like he'd been waiting. "The job," she said. "Just the job. Nothing else." "Just the job," he said. She hung up without saying goodbye. She put the card in the kitchen drawer. She went to bed. And in a high-rise across the city, Dante set his phone down on the desk and leaned back his chair and exhaled for the first time in 2 days. The restaurant was called Kiro. It sat on the second floor of a building in Midtown that looked like nothing from the outside and everything from the inside. Dark wood, clean lines, low lighting that made every table feel like a private conversation. The menu was Korean. The clientele was wealthy. The staff moved like they had been trained to be invisible. Elena started on a Monday. She arrived 15 minutes early, tied her apron with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing this since she was 19, and memorized a floor plan before her first table sat down. By the end of her first shift, she knew every server's name, every table number, and which dishes the kitchen was slow on. By the end of her first week, the floor manager stopped checking her sections because there was nothing to check. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, not because she loved it, but because she refused to be bad at anything that kept her brother fed. She moved through the dining room the way she moved through everything. With precision, with control, with a wall between herself and every person in the room that was so seamless. Most people didn't even know it was there. She didn't flirt with the owner. She didn't ask about the men in dark suits who sometimes came in through the back entrance. She didn't linger after her shift or make conversation with the bartender or do any of the things people do when they're trying to belong somewhere. She clocked in. She worked. She clocked out. She went home to Marcus. Dante noticed everything. He had an office on the 3rd floor, glass walls that overlooked the dining room from above. He used it 2 or 3 nights a week. His men assumed he came to handle business. He did, but he also watched the floor. He watched her, not obviously, not the way men usually watch women, with hunger or ownership or the need to be noticed watching. He watched her the way he watched rivals across negotiating tables, with attention, with patience, with a specific focus on a man trying to understand something that didn't fit his existing categories. Elena didn't fit. Everyone in Dante's orbit operated on the same frequency. Deference, caution, the constant low hum of people trying to stay in his good graces. Elena operated on no frequency at all. She didn't adjust her voice when she knew he was nearby. She didn't smile more or talk less or straighten her posture. She treated him exactly the way she treated every other person in the building, with professional courtesy and absolutely nothing beyond it. It unsettled him. He was not a man who was easily unsettled. The scheduling incident happened in her 3rd week. Dante came down the floor on a Friday evening during a full service. Something had gone wrong with the reservations. A double booking that had 2 parties arriving at the same time for the same table. The floor manager was sweating. The hostess was frozen. Dante stepped in and started rearranging the seating chart himself, moving names around with the quiet authority of a man who expected his decisions to be executed without question. "That won't work," Elena said. The room didn't go silent. It went airless. The floor manager looked at the ground. The hostess stopped breathing. Two servers at the drink station turned their heads slowly, like witnesses to something they weren't sure they wanted to see. Elena was standing 3 feet from Dante with a tray balanced on one hand, and an expression that suggested she hadn't noticed the temperature in the room had dropped by 30 degrees. She pointed at the chart with her free hand. Table 9 has a regular who always sits there on Fridays. You move her, and she'll complain to your manager for the next month. Put the second party at 12. It's the same size, and they won't know the difference. She said it the way she said everything. Flat, certain, without apology. Like being right was more important than being careful. Like the fact that every person in the room was terrified of the man she was correcting hadn't occurred to her, or had occurred to her and simply didn't matter. Dante looked at her. She looked back. The tray didn't wobble. Her eyes didn't drop. 3 seconds passed. He looked at the chart. He moved the second party to table 12. He said nothing. He walked back toward the stairs. Elena delivered her drinks. The room exhaled. The floor manager wiped his forehead. The hostess sat down like her legs had given out. That night, after the last customer left and the lights came up and the staff filed out into the cold, Dante sat alone in his third-floor office. The dining room was dark below. The chair across from his desk was empty. The building was silent. He thought about the way she said, "That won't work." No hesitation. No softening. No fear. He almost smiled. He didn't. But it was close. It started with the small things. Elena didn't notice at first because she was trained not to notice. Trained by years of keeping her head down and her walls up and her attention on the only things that mattered. The job, the paycheck, Marcus. Everything else was noise. Everything else was a door she didn't need to open. But the small things kept happening. The first time was on a Wednesday. Elena was closing, wiping tables, flipping chairs, running through the checklist the floor manager left on a clipboard by the bar. The restaurant was empty. The kitchen was dark. She assumed she was alone until she heard the creak of a chair from the third floor and looked up to the glass walls of the office and saw Dante sitting at his desk with a pen in his hand and a stack of papers in front of him and the look of a man who had nowhere else to be. She went back to wiping tables. 10 minutes later, he came downstairs carrying 2 cups. He set one on the table she had just cleaned. Tea. No milk. No sugar. She hadn't told him how she took her tea. He had watched her make it for herself 3 times in the break room, and remembered. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. He sat down across from her with his own cup and didn't say anything else. They sat in the empty restaurant for 20 minutes. She finished her tea. He finished his. They talked about nothing. The rain, the construction on 5th Street that was making deliveries late, a customer that evening who had sent back the same dish 3 times and then left a 40% tip. Elena told the story without smiling, but her voice had something in it that was close. Dante listened the way he always listened, completely, like whatever she was saying was the only sound in the world. She didn't ask about the men who came through the back entrance. She didn't ask about the phone calls he took in Korean with his jaw tight and his voice low. She didn't ask about any of it, because she understood boundaries better than anyone. She had built enough of them to recognize when someone else's were load-bearing. The second time was a Friday. Same routine. Closing. Empty restaurant. He came downstairs. This time he didn't bring tea. He just sat at the bar while she finished and opened his laptop and worked in silence while she moved through her checklist. They didn't speak for 30 minutes. It should have been uncomfortable. It wasn't. The third time, she noticed his hand. He was reaching for his cup and his sleeve pulled back, and she saw the bruising across his knuckles. Deep purple fading to yellow at the edges, the kind that doesn't come from bumping into a cabinet. She looked at it for half a second. She didn't stop wiping the counter. She didn't look at his face. "You should ice that," she said. He pulled his sleeve down. "It's fine." "It's not fine. It's swollen. Ice it when you get home, or it'll be worse tomorrow." She said it the same way she said everything, direct, unbothered, like caring about someone's hand was just practical information and not something that meant anything deeper. But Dante looked at her when she said it, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not gratitude, something quieter. The look of a man who had 100 people around him at all times, and none of them noticed when he was hurt. He iced it when he got home. He didn't tell her that. Elena took the train home that night. Marcus was asleep. The apartment was dark. She dropped her bag by the door and sat on the edge of her bed without turning on the light. Her shoes were still on. Her coat was still on. She sat there with her hands in her lap and felt something moving beneath the surface of her chest. Slow, warm, dangerous. She recognized it immediately. The pull, the quiet, treacherous gravity of starting to care about someone. The first thread of attachment that, if she let it, would weave itself into something she couldn't cut without bleeding. She had felt it before, with Kieran, and she remembered exactly how that ended. She took off her shoes. She took off her coat. She got into bed and stared at the ceiling and told herself it was nothing, just tea, just silence, just a bruised hand she happened to notice. But she lay awake for a long time, and when she finally slept, she dreamed about an empty restaurant and a man who remembered how she took her tea. Kieran didn't knock. He leaned on the buzzer until Marcus opened the door, because that's how Kieran had always operated, not with force, but with persistence, with the slow, grinding pressure of a man who understood that patience was just another form of control. Elena was in the kitchen when she heard Marcus say, "She doesn't want to see you." The words were steady, but his voice was young, and she could hear the edge in it, the sound of a 17-year-old boy trying to be a wall when he was still learning how to be a door. She came around the corner and saw Kieran standing in the hallway, and her body did something her mind had no say in. She stopped, not the way she stopped at the diner, calm, deliberate, in control. This was different. This was a full system shutdown. Her feet stopped. Her hands stopped. Her breathing stopped. Every muscle in her body locked into a position she hadn't held in 2 years, but that her bones remembered like a language she thought she'd forgotten. Kieran hadn't changed. That was the worst part. He looked exactly the same. Tall, lean, handsome in a way that made people trust him before they knew better. His smile was the same. Easy, warm, the kind of smile that made you feel chosen until you realized it was a leash. "Oh," he said, like a greeting. Like 2 years of nothing hadn't happened. Like the last time she saw him, she hadn't been packing a bag at 4 a.m. with her hands shaking so badly she couldn't zip it. "Leave," she said, but the word came out wrong. Too quiet, too thin. The voice that had stared down a gunman in a diner, steady, unbothered, carved from stone, was gone. In its place was the voice Kieran had spent 3 years building. The small one, the careful one, the one that asked permission before it spoke. He stepped into the apartment without being invited. He didn't touch her. He never needed to. He just filled the space the way he always did. With his body, his height, his ease, his certainty that every room he entered belonged to him. "Saw your video," he said. "You're famous now." He looked around the apartment. The small kitchen, the second-hand furniture, the crack in the ceiling she hadn't been able to fix. His eyes cataloged everything, and she could feel him doing the math, the quiet calculation of a man measuring how far she'd fallen, so he could remind her she'd never rise. "Still doing this, huh?" he said. Not a question. Marcus was standing behind Elena with his fists tight at his sides and his jaw clenched, and she could feel his anger radiating like heat. He was 17. He was built like their father, and he hated Kieran with a clarity that Elena envied, because her own feelings about the man standing in her kitchen were so tangled she couldn't find the ends. "You need to go," Marcus said. Kieran didn't look at him. He looked at Elena. He always looked at Elena because he knew, had always known, that she was a lock and everyone else was just furniture. "I just came to check on you," he said. Soft, gentle, the voice, the one that used to come after the silence, after the coldness, after the days of being ignored until she was so desperate for warmth that she'd accept any version of it, even the kind that burned. Elena said nothing. She stood in her own kitchen, in her own apartment, and said nothing because her mouth wouldn't open and her voice wouldn't come. And the woman who told a robber he picked the wrong morning was nowhere to be found. Kieran stayed for 6 minutes. He talked. She didn't. When he left, He touched her shoulder on the way out. Just a brush. Just enough. And she flinched so hard Marcus made a sound behind her like something inside him broke. The door closed. Elena didn't move. Marcus was already in the kitchen, pulling open the junk drawer where Elena kept the business card she thought she'd hidden. He dialed a number on the restaurant's main line, because it was the only number he had that wasn't a friend from school or a pizza place. Dante arrived in 20 minutes. He came alone. No car, no driver. He knocked once, gently. Marcus opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table. Her hands were flat on the surface. Her eyes were dry. She looked exactly the way she looked in the diner, still, composed, unreadable. But Dante saw what everyone else would have missed. The slight tremor in her left hand. The way her jaw was clenched so tight the muscle flickered. The way her eyes were focused on a point on the wall that wasn't there. She wasn't calm. She was holding herself together with everything she had, and it was costing her every ounce of strength she possessed. "He's gone," Marcus said quietly from the hallway. Dante nodded. He didn't sit down. He didn't move toward her. He stood in the doorway of her kitchen and waited. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was low and shaking and furious. "Don't," she said. "I didn't say anything. Don't look at me like that. Don't stand there like you need to fix this. I don't need you here. I didn't call you. I didn't ask for this." Her voice cracked on the last word, not from sadness, from rage. At Kieran for showing up, at Marcus for calling, at Dante for standing in her kitchen with that look on his face, the one that said he saw her, really saw her, not the woman from the diner, not the waitress who didn't flinch, but the woman underneath, the one who froze in her own home because a man she left 2 years ago walked through the door and her body forgot every wall she'd built since. She was furious at herself for freezing, for going small, for becoming the version of herself she had spent 2 years dismantling brick by brick. And in the space of 6 minutes, Kieran had pulled her back. Dante didn't argue. He didn't leave. He stood in her doorway and took every word the same way she had taken the gun in the diner, without flinching. "I'll be outside," he said quietly. "If you need anything." He left. He sat on the stairwell, one floor down for an hour. Elena didn't come out. He didn't expect her to. When he finally stood and walked down to the street, he looked up at her window. The light was off, but she was sitting by it. He couldn't see her, but she could see him. And she watched him walk to the corner and disappear into the dark. And she pressed her forehead against the cold glass and breathed. Elena didn't come to work the next day or the day after. On the third day, Dante drove to her apartment. He didn't send a car. He didn't send a man. He came himself, because something told him this wasn't a conversation that could be delegated. She opened the door on the second knock. She was dressed. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were clear and hard, and ready for exactly this moment. She had been expecting him, maybe even waiting. "Don't," she said. "You haven't been at work. I'm not coming back." She said it the way she said everything. Flat. Final. A door closing with no handle on the outside. She stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, like a woman guarding the last space on earth that belonged to her. And she looked at him with an expression that dared him to argue. He didn't argue. He stood in the hallway and waited. "I don't need this," Elena said. "I don't need you showing up at my door every time something goes wrong in my life. I don't need a man in a suit deciding when I need help and how much and what kind. I've had that. I've lived inside that. A man who showed up with answers I didn't ask for and solutions I didn't want and made me feel like I owed him something for every single one." Her voice was rising, not shouting. Elena didn't shout, but the volume was climbing in a way that told Dante the words had been sitting in her chest for days, maybe longer, pressing against her ribs like something alive. "You don't know me," she said. "You saw a video. You saw a woman who didn't cry when a gun was in her face. And you decided that was interesting. You gave me a job. You brought me tea. You showed up at my apartment at midnight because my 17-year-old brother called you. And now you're here again, standing in my hallway, looking at me like I'm something you need to fix. She took a breath. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. I am not something you fix. I am not a project. I am not a debt you owe. I don't need your money. I don't need your power. I don't need another man standing in my doorway telling me he knows what's best for me. Because the last one who did that spent 3 years taking me apart piece by piece until I couldn't recognize my own face in the mirror. The hallway was silent. A door opened somewhere on the floor below and closed again. The building hummed with the low frequency of other people's lives continuing, while two people stood 3 feet apart with 7 years of unspoken history between them. Dante took every word without moving. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. He stood in the hallway the same way she had stood behind that counter, absorbing the impact without flinching, letting it land, letting it stay. Then he spoke, quietly, without defense. I'm not here because I think you're weak, he said. I'm here because 7 years ago, a woman I'd never met saw me through a window at 3 a.m. and walked into a diner. She had no reason to enter. Elena's hand loosened on the doorframe. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I was 22 years old, Dante continued. My father had just died. I had nothing. I was no one. And I was sitting in that booth deciding whether or not to stay alive. He looked at her, not at the waitress, not at the woman from the video. At her. She sat across from me. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just sat there and talked to me like I was a person. She bought me coffee with money I could tell she didn't have. She stayed for an hour. And when she left, she said something I've never forgotten. He paused. That woman was you, Elena. The hallway contracted. The light from her apartment fell across both of them in a yellow stripe that cut the floor in half. Elena stared at him. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were wet, but nothing fell. I don't remember you, she whispered. I know. I don't remember your face. I know. But you remember the night. She did. She could see it. Not clearly, not completely, but in fragments. A diner, rain, a young man with his head down, and his hands shaking and coffee going cold in front of him. She had been 20, walking home from the library. She saw him through the glass, and something in the way he was sitting made her stop, made her go inside, made her sit down across from a stranger because he looked like a person who was running out of reasons. Whatever you're thinking about doing, she said softly, it can wait until morning. Dante closed his eyes. Just for a moment. When he opened them, they were bright, and he didn't try to hide it. That sentence is the reason I'm alive, he said. That voice is the reason I'm standing here. Not because I think you need saving, because you saved me, and I have carried that debt every single day for 7 years. Elena leaned against the doorframe. The fight went out of her, not because she lost it, but because she set it down. The anger, the armor, the wall she had been holding up with both hands since Kieran walked back into her life. She let it rest, just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. His name is Kieran, she said, quiet, raw, no preamble. I was with him for 3 years. He never hit me. He never had to. He just talked and talked and talked until I forgot what my own voice sounded like, until I stopped disagreeing, until I stopped leaving the apartment, until I looked in the mirror and the woman looking back was someone I didn't recognize. Dante didn't move. He listened the way he had listened in the restaurant, completely, like her voice was the only sound that existed. I left him 2 years ago, Elena continued. I packed a bag at 4 a.m, and I walked out and I didn't look back. I rebuilt everything. The apartment, the job, Marcus's school, my name, my face, my voice. Her chin trembled once. She caught it, and then he walked into my kitchen, and I froze. 6 minutes. He was there for 6 minutes, and I became her again. The small version, the quiet version, the one he built. She looked at Dante with eyes that were wet and furious, and honest in ways she hadn't been with anyone in years. That's why I can't do this, she said. Because letting someone in means giving them the power to make me small again, and I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than feel what I felt in that kitchen. The silence that followed was enormous. It filled the hallway the way silence fills a room after someone says the truest thing they've ever said. Heavy, sacred, the kind of quiet you don't break, because breaking it would be a kind of violence. Dante looked at her. She looked at him. Two people standing in a hallway with every wall between them finally on the ground. "You're not small, Elena," he said. "You have never been small. Not 7 years ago. Not in that diner. Not now." She pressed her lips together hard. A single tear fell. She wiped it fast, angry at it for existing. They stood there for a long time. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The building hummed around them. The light from her apartment turned the hallway gold. Then Elena stepped aside. Not all the way. Just enough. Just enough to let him through, if he wanted to come in. Just enough to say what her voice couldn't. Dante stepped inside. She closed the door behind him. They sat at her kitchen table. No tea. No food. No pretense. Just two people in a quiet apartment with nothing between them except the truth. And for the first time in 7 years, neither of them was sitting alone. Marcus called her from school on a Tuesday. His voice was wrong. Not scared. Exactly. Marcus had too much of their father in him to sound scared. But tight. Controlled. The voice of a boy trying very hard to sound like a man. He was outside the school, Marcus said, just standing there by the fence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. Elena's hand tightened around her phone until the case creaked. She was standing in the break room at Kiro. She had come back to work 4 days after the night in the hallway, without explanation, without apology, and Dante hadn't asked for either. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes and felt something move through her body that wasn't fear. It was fury, not the shaking, helpless kind she felt when Kieran stood in her kitchen, not the kind that turned inward and became shame. This was different. This was clean. This was the anger of a woman who had survived everything a man could do to her spirit and had one line left that could not be crossed. He had crossed it. "Go inside," she told Marcus. "Stay in the building. I'm coming." She didn't call Dante. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She took off her apron, folded it on the break room counter, walked out the back door, and took the train across the city with her jaw set and her hands still in her lap and a calm settling over her that she recognized. It was the same calm from the diner, the same stillness that came when the gun was in her face, and the place inside her that went quiet when everything else was loud, not because she was numb, but because she had already decided what she was going to do, and there was nothing left to be afraid of. She found Kieran 3 blocks from the school. He was leaning against his car like a man with nowhere to be. Relaxed. Easy. That same smile. That same posture that said the world was his, and everyone in it was just borrowing space. He saw her coming, and his smile widened. He opened his mouth to speak, to deliver whatever version of charm or control or casual cruelty he had prepared. And Elena stopped 6 feet in front of him and spoke first. "You don't get to talk," she said. Her voice was level, steady, the voice from the diner, the voice that made a robber lower his gun, the voice that had been buried under 3 years of Kieran's weight, and it clawed its way back out, and was standing now in the open air, unbroken. "You came to my home. I let that go. That was my mistake. But you do not come near my brother. You do not stand outside his school. You do not exist in the same space as him. Not today. Not ever." Kieran's smile faded. Not all at once. In stages. The way a man's confidence leaves when he realizes the person in front of him is not the person he remembers. "Elle, I'm not finished." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The woman you knew is gone. You didn't kill her. She outgrew you. And the woman standing here right now will take apart everything you have, your name, your reputation, every corner of your life. If you come near Marcus again, I don't need a man to do it. I don't need money. I don't need help. I just need you to look at me and understand that I mean every word I'm saying. She held his gaze. She didn't blink. She didn't waver. She stood on that sidewalk with the wind pulling at her jacket and the noise of the city around them, and she let him see exactly who she was. Not the girl he met when she was 23 and grieving and vulnerable. Not the woman who flinched in her kitchen 6 days ago. This one, the one who was done. Kieran looked at her for a long time. His jaw worked. His hands flexed at his sides. He searched her face a crack. The one he always found. The one he always pressed until opened. He searched and found nothing. He got in his car. He drove away. He didn't look back. Elena stood on the sidewalk and breathed. In and out. Slow. Steady. The adrenaline hit 3 seconds later. A wave that started in her knees and climbed to her chest. And she absorbed it, standing up, because she was done falling down. She turned around, and Dante was there, not close, across the street, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, the way he leaned against everything. Like the world could take its time, because he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't walking toward her. He wasn't checking on her. He was just there, present, visible, a man standing in the background of someone else's victory, because he understood the difference between fighting for someone and being there after. Elena looked at him across the street. He looked back. The city moved between them. Cars, people, noise, life, and neither of them moved. She crossed the street. She stopped in front of him, and she didn't say thank you. She didn't explain. She didn't ask how he knew where she was, or why he came, or what he heard. She said, "Do you want to get coffee?" Dante's face did something it almost never did. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile. Not yet. The same almost from 7 years ago. The same almost from the night she corrected him in front of his staff. The same almost that lived in the space between who he was and who he was becoming. "Yeah," he said. "I do." They walked into a diner together. Not the one from the robbery. Not the one from 7 years ago. A new one. A small one. The kind of place with vinyl booths and bad lighting and coffee that tastes like it was made 3 hours ago. Elena slid behind the counter like she owned it. An old reflex, muscle memory from 1,000 shifts. The actual waitress looked at her sideways but didn't stop her. Elena poured 2 cups. She set one in front of Dante. She kept one for herself. He sat on a stool. She stood behind the counter. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The rain had started outside, and it streaked the windows the same way it had 7 years ago, in a different diner, in a different city. When a girl who was too young to be that kind sat across from a stranger who was too broken to ask for help. She didn't remember his face from that night, but she remembered the feeling. The pull that said, "Sit down." The quiet voice inside her that said, "Stay." The instinct that told her a person across the table was worth an hour of her time, even when she had nothing to spare. That instinct was still there. It had survived everything. Her parents' death. Kieran. The years of silence. The rebuilding. It survived because it was the truest part of her, the part that no one could take. Dante drank his coffee. Elena drank hers. The world outside was loud and dangerous and complicated, and full of men like Kieran and empires like Dante's and systems that chewed up women like Elena and spit them out smaller than they started. But in here it was just 2 people. A counter. 2 cups. And the sound of a voice that saved a life once and was learning, slowly, carefully, on its own terms, to save itself now. No empire. No throne. No rescue. Just Elena Park. Whole. Standing. Choosing to let someone stay. If this story touched your heart, if you felt every silence, every wall, every moment Elena stood her ground when the world tried to make her small, then don't let this be the end. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And subscribe for more stories of people who fight the world and win. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling with me.